And in this, John Mearsheimer is right about the American mentality, which is that the United States sees Russia as a threat, not because of any specific ideology, but because it is big. And the United States sees China as a threat, not because of anything that China does or is other than being big and successful. And therefore, China's only offense is that it threatens American dominance. And that, I think, is a succinct description of the viewpoint of the American leadership. Now, to come back to my view of economics, this is a terrible mistake, not only on a moral level, but on a practical level. The United States has 4% of the world population, 335 million people. How could 4% of the world dominate the world? It's not possible, except if all the rest of the world were to remain poor, unsuccessful, backward, and so forth. But there's not only no moral reason for that, there's no practical reason why that should be the case. So I long believed that poorer countries can grow faster and catch up. And China, of course, is the greatest success story in history of that. But China follows a basic pattern that Japan followed previously, that Hong Kong, Singapore followed previously, because catching up is possible if the leadership is good, if the planning is good, if the strategy is good. There's all this headroom for rapid economic growth possible, and China proved the case once again at a scale unprecedented in history. So the U.S. viewpoint about dominance makes no sense, not only not morally and not practically in terms of security, because the world's not safe if the U.S. is rich and Russia is unstable with nuclear weapons. Why does that make the U.S. secure? That makes the U.S. more dangerous. But it's also wrong economically, because Russia will catch up. China will catch up. Africa will catch up. And the United States will find out that being 4% of the world population is just 4%. It's not enough to rule the world. The U.S. will have to learn to be cooperative, and will have to learn that statecraft is more than overthrowing governments. But, and here I will come to the point about current politics, the U.S. still does not understand this till today. And the wars that we see and the crises that we see are still crises of the old imperial mentality. So the war in Ukraine is a war that the U.S. caused, not a war that Putin caused, but a war that the U.S. caused by expanding the military alliance, NATO, eastward, and trying to set up a military base or bases in Ukraine and in the South Caucasus, especially the country Georgia. And the Russian government said, no, you can't have military bases on our border. We don't accept that. That's a real security threat for us. And the American position was, it's none of your business, Russia, what we do. If Ukraine says yes, we're going to put our missiles next to you. And President Putin said, no, you're not. That's dangerous for us. And the United States said, it's none of your business. And so this is the essence of the Ukraine conflict, which is that the U.S. said we can expand our military reach anywhere. The Russians said not on our border, and it finally came to war. Before it came to war, the government in Ukraine in 2010 was very clever. It said, we want neutrality. Well, read Thucydides. The Americans did not accept Ukraine's call for neutrality. What did the United States do to the president who wanted neutrality? It overthrew that president in February 2014. So the U.S. made a coup together with Ukrainian forces. The U.S. role was quite obvious, though it was denied, so we can call it a covert regime change operation. I happen to have been told by some of the participants just how much the U.S. played a role, and at a crucial moment, a phone call by the U.S. diplomat, Victoria Nuland, was intercepted by the Russians and posted online. And that call said the next government should be so-and-so, which was the next government, actually. So the U.S. chose the next government. And where is Victoria Nuland today? She is my colleague at Columbia University. So this is the route to success. Make a coup, and then you get to be a Columbia professor. So this is the Ukraine conflict. President Trump came into office saying, I want to stop this war because it's useless, and the Russians are winning on the battlefield. But interestingly, President Trump does not have the power or the logic to stop the war, because he can't say publicly the obvious. He can't say to the American people, NATO will not expand. If he says that, he's declared, you're a weakling, you're a traitor, you're making a concession to President Putin, you're giving up, you're on the payroll of the Russians. And so the imperial logic still prevails, even if the individual as president might want to do something different. Of course, none of us can figure out Donald Trump's mentality, not even Donald Trump. So we don't know what he really, truly thinks, but what I know is that he seems to want to end the Ukraine war, but does not have the political strength and the individual leadership to end it, because all around him is the military-industrial complex that says the U.S. can go where it wants. Then comes the Middle East conflict, second conflict. This is also an imperial conflict. It started, of course, as so many conflicts do, with the British. And the conflict with Ukraine, by the way, started with the British because in 1853, Britain went to war against Russia for exactly the same reason that the United States went to war against Russia in 2014. Britain said we need to weaken Russia in 1853. So the war in Ukraine is like the 19th century Crimean War, almost the same actors, but the United States wasn't involved in the first one, but Britain was involved in both of them. When it comes to the Middle East, this is also a crisis made by Britain, and it comes from World War I, as you know, when Ottoman Empire, which ruled the Middle East, was defeated by the Allied powers, the US, France, and Britain. And Britain was the dominant imperial power of the age, especially in the Middle East. It ruled over Egypt, it ruled over Aden, which is Yemen today, because this was the route to Britain's empire in India, the sea route. And so Britain was very careful to control the whole sea lane from the Mediterranean to India. And India was the crown jewel of the British Empire. So at the end of World War I, when the Turkish Empire was defeated, Britain aimed to control all of this territory. And it made many promises and many contradictory promises to other powers. Britain told the Arabs, you will control this region. Britain told the French, you will control this region. Britain told the Jews, you will control this region. And of course, Britain ultimately wanted to control the region. So this was typical British imperial deceit or duplicity. But one of the outcomes was the Balfour Declaration, in which Britain called for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in what was a province of the Ottoman Empire, and which became known as Palestine after World War I, which was the ancient Roman name that was used for this territory also. So Britain took over Palestine under the League of Nations, and it said that this would be a Jewish homeland. This is a very complicated, weird story, because the Jewish faith had its main temple in this place 2,000 years earlier, but it had been banished from this place by the Roman Empire in the year 135 AD. And now it was recreating this ancient state. The only problem was that 95% of the population was Arabs who did not want a Jewish homeland in this territory. But Britain used its imperial power to force the in-migration of people of Jewish religion, especially from Eastern Europe, to claim a part of British-controlled Palestine. And a very long story, that has led to 100 years of crisis, because there was a local population. The local population resisted the incoming of migrants from Europe especially, and then after the state of Israel was established, from other regions of the world, including the Middle East and South Asia, and the mentality of the Jewish state, which was established in 1948 by the United Nations, was our security depends on having no Arab state next to us that opposes us. And so the idea of sharing the land, which was a UN idea, was actually rejected by both sides in a way. The Arabs said, we're the majority, we should rule. And the Jews said, we're the minority, we need to dominate, because otherwise we won't be safe. And so this has led from 1948 until today to an unresolved war. But remember, this was a state created by the British Empire and now backed by the US Empire. So Israel could not survive without the US being the imperial power that enforces Israel's power in the region. Because Israel's just 8 million people. The Arab world is about 400 million people. And Israel, therefore, depends on its security entirely on the United States. The United States has seen this as an imperial project that's good for the United States, because if the U.S. has control over the Middle East through Israel, well, that gives the U.S. control effectively, militarily, in the region. So the U.S. has backed Israel for many decades during this period. It's a very dangerous ongoing conflict because it is very unjust, and Israel needs to use more and more force in order to repress the aspirations of the Palestinian people. And the more force that Israel uses, the more resistance there is. And we've reached a point of violence that is unprecedented in modern times. Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza right now, which is one part of the Palestinian lands. And every day they're slaughtering tens or hundreds of innocent people with open fire. And today there was another massacre. People came for food and they were just shot by the Israeli armed forces. Iran, as you know, which is a long empire that has 5,000 years of history, backed the Palestinian cause, and it supported resistance to Israel. Both Hamas and Hezbollah, two groups, and in Yemen also the Houthi militants. So Israel has always had the idea we need to topple the Iranian regime. Instead of saying we need to settle the Palestinian crisis by giving a state of Palestine next door to a state of Israel, Israel has said we need to overthrow the Iranian government so that they don't bother us. And Israel actually made a long list of governments that it wanted overthrown by the United States because those governments were resisting Israel's attempt to control the region. And the list actually was made, literally made, we want 7 governments overthrown. And that list was unveiled in 2001 one of our generals, General Wesley Clark, talked about this in an amazing set of interviews. And the 7 countries are Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, and Libya. So 7 countries that were supporting the Palestinian cause. And the Israeli government said to the Americans, you overthrow those 7 governments. Well, it's not so easy. Those turned into 7 major wars. We had the war in Lebanon for many, many years. We had a 15-year war in Syria, which is still going on because the U.S. tried to did overthrow the Syrian government. We had the U.S. invasion of Iraq in March 2003. We had the U.S. bombing of Libya in 2011, which created a civil war in Libya. We had the U.S. supporting an insurgency in Sudan to break Sudan into 2 countries, Sudan and South Sudan, both of which are in civil war now. And we have had the U.S. supporting interventions in Somalia, which is an ongoing battleground as well. So the U.S., the one that was missing up until 2 weeks ago, or up until last month, was Iran. And the Israeli government was always begging the U.S., bomb Iran, bomb Iran, bomb Iran. And finally, Trump, who's, again, not very smart, not very effective, not very capable of resisting these kinds of demands, said, okay, we'll bomb Iran. And the war, such as it was, lasted 12 days. Israel went in and assassinated dozens of people through its Mossad, the secret service, or the spy agency, but basically it's an assassination unit. And the idea was to create a regime change. But it failed. The government is intact, and the situation is more dangerous than ever because Iran is a country of 100 million people almost. It's a major country. It has big missile systems. It has a real military capacity, and it has an alliance with Russia. And it has friendship with other nuclear powers like Pakistan. So even if it doesn't have its own nuclear weapons, maybe Pakistan will give it nuclear weapons. Maybe Pakistan would defend Iran if there was a full-fledged war with Israel. So this is the second region where imperial mentality lasts until today. The U.S. is unwilling to compromise on the imperial prerogatives. So the final point that I want to raise and then close is the U.S.-China confrontation and how dangerous it is. As I said, the U.S. got along well with China from the 1970s to around 2010, in my estimation, because China was viewed by America as poor, lots of villages that grew rice. You could make our components for our products, make our smartphones, and so forth. But China wasn't a threat. And it was a good counterweight to the Soviet Union or to Russia. That was the attitude. Not too much more. So not too much attention given and not too much concern. And ideology played no concern, because during the Cultural Revolution period, which was not exactly American ideology, this is when the relationship was formed between Mao and Nixon. Then came the opening, and that was an opportunity for investment and trade. That's fine. But ideology played no special role. Starting around 2010, the American leaders that were watching this said, oh, China's getting awfully big and rather successful. And then I think two announcements by China really opened up American eyes. One was the Belt and Road Initiative, which was suddenly an economic, financial infrastructure initiative that had suddenly 100 partner countries, and the U.S. didn't have anything like that. And then the Made in China 2025 program, which was a really brilliant initiative of China to identify 10 major technology areas and set policies to make a major advance in these areas. And this is one of the most successful industrial policies I know of in history, the Made in China 2025, because it really worked. It really produced the EV revolution. It really produced the digital revolution here. It really produced the renewable energy revolution. So it was very successful, but it terrified the Americans suddenly. So starting around 2015, the whole view changed almost suddenly in the United States. The view went from economic partnership to the need to contain China, the need to do something to slow down China's economic advance. Okay, all of this is quite dumb in my view. You don't get ahead in this world by stopping someone else, and there's no reason to. You're not going to be better off. You're not going to be safe. It's just a lose-lose proposition if it's successful, and it probably wouldn't be successful in any event. It started under Obama, by the way. It didn't start with Trump. It started definitely under Obama. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership idea, which was the dumbest idea of trade policy that I know of, which was to make an Asian trade system without China. How can you do that? China's the main trade country for all of Asia, but the United States had the idea, we'll make an Asian trade system without China. This is only in America could you have such delusions. In any event, it started with Obama, it continued with Trump, and it also implicates Taiwan issue, of course. This is the most dangerous flashpoint of all, maybe the most dangerous in the whole world, because the American politicians, because of this mindset, do not know how to stay out of China's internal issues. And so rather than saying, that's not our problem, you settle this peacefully, but it's not our issue, the United States, of course, is providing large flows of armaments to Taiwan. And the American political leaders are talking openly about defending Taiwan and militarily defending Taiwan. If China said we're going to militarily defend the state of Missouri, or we're going to militarily defend Texas, or we're going to militarily defend California, it would not play very well in the U.S. But the U.S., because of the imperial mentality, cannot put itself in China's position or doesn't care to, because the U.S. can determine what should be done. So just to conclude, I view this issue as extremely dangerous. And peace actually depends on the good sense of the Taiwanese leaders, which is fragile. Because if a Taiwanese president were to declare independence, all hell could break out. Because the United States would not necessarily have any responsibility. And this is why the situation is so dangerous. And if Taiwan were smart, and my feeling is Taiwan could end up like Ukraine, destroyed in between two fighting giants. And if Taiwan were smart, the first thing they should say is to the United States, don't send us any weapons, please. We don't want a fight here. We'll handle our own diplomacy across the Taiwan Straits. Please, quote, don't defend us, because we don't want to end up like Ukraine, caught between two giant powers. So I'll conclude here for our discussion to say that the world really is dangerous right now because of this mindset, on the one hand, that I've described in the US, and at the same time because of changing reality. I want to end on an optimistic note. If we can avoid conflict, because of the technological revolution, we really could have a world of shared